The morning Marcus Hale sent the offer letter, he sat alone in his office for 12 minutes before he pressed send. He was 53 years old, the founder of a logistics company with 1,100 employees and a balance sheet that made other men nervous to look at. And he sat there in the blue glow of his monitor, with his hands folded on his desk and his jaw tight, staring at a name he had been carrying around like a stone for 7 years. Renee Colton. He had found her 3 weeks ago, or rather one of his HR managers had found her, not knowing what she was doing. The resume had come through the open posting for an operations coordinator role at the Memphis distribution hub, and it was a strong resume. The kind that gets pulled to the top of the stack, the kind that signals 10 years of warehouse and logistics experience, a systems certification, a clean employment record. His HR manager had flagged it, and Marcus had been reviewing the batch when he scrolled to the name and went very still. Nobody in that office knew why he closed his laptop and went home early that day. Now, 3 weeks of background checks and a phone screening he had listened to from a conference room 2 floors up, and the answer was what he had known it would be. She was exactly who she was. She had always been exactly who she was. He pressed send. If you have ever done something kind for a stranger and never learned what became of it, stay with this story. Because sometimes the ledger settles in ways you never imagined. Sometimes the thing you gave on a Tuesday in February with nowhere to be but the bus stop, the thing you never thought about again, is the exact thing that brought someone else all the way back. Renee Colton was 37 years old and had been working in logistics since she was 26. She had done it first for a trucking company in North Memphis, sorting freight manifests on a second-shift schedule so she could get her daughter to school in the mornings. Then for a mid-sized wholesale outfit on the south side, coordinating inbound receiving and supervising a team of 6. She was good at the work. She understood it in the way some people understand language, not just the grammar but the music underneath. The rhythm of a dock that was running right versus one that was quietly coming apart. She could tell by the gap between a truck's arrival scan and its bay assignment whether the backlog was going to compound or clear by noon. What she was not good at, had never been good at, was staying anywhere long enough for that understanding to pay off. Not because she was restless, because the companies she worked for kept making decisions that pushed good people out first. The layoffs at the trucking company came when her daughter, Amara, was 9 and had just been diagnosed with a moderate hearing loss that would require 2 kinds of therapists and a pair of hearing aids that cost $3,400 out of pocket after the insurance fought the claim for 6 months and then paid a portion. Renee had dipped into the savings she had been building since Amara was born, a savings account she added to every single month, $40 when money was tight and sometimes $100 when it wasn't, money she had been calling Amara's college fund, because that was the story she needed to tell herself to keep putting it in. She spent most of it on the hearing aids and the therapy copays. She told Amara the college fund was still growing. She made up numbers that sounded reassuring. When the trucking company let her go along with 11 others in a Friday afternoon meeting, she still remembered in fragments the HR coordinator's shoes, the sound of a water cooler cycling in the hall. Renee drove home and sat in her car in the driveway for 45 minutes before she went inside. She did not cry in front of Amara. She told her it was a good thing, that she had been looking for something better anyway, that change was how people grew. She believed maybe 2 of those sentences. The next year was the hardest of her life, and she had had some hard years. She picked up a part-time job doing inventory counts at a chain grocery distribution centre while she applied for full-time work. The inventory work paid $11 an hour and ran from 11 at night to 4 in the morning, and she was exhausted in a way she hadn't felt since the early Amara years, a tiredness that lived in her back and behind her eyes and didn't fully lift even after sleep. She kept applying. She got interviews. She was good in interviews, precise and practical and honest about what she could do, and she got close on 2 positions before losing them both to candidates with 4-year degrees she hadn't had the time or money to finish. There is a particular grief in being capable and being passed over anyway. Renee knew that grief by name. She was waiting for the 21 bus on a Wednesday evening in late February, 6 months into the worst of it, when the man sat down on the bench beside her. She did not know his name. She would not know his name for 7 years. He looked like he was in his mid-40s, and he looked like something was wrong. He was wearing a good suit, the kind that meant a real job in an office somewhere. But The jacket was open and the tie was slightly loose, and he was sitting with his elbows on his knees and his head bowed in a way that had nothing to do with the cold. He was holding his phone face down on the bench beside him, and he was very still, the way a person gets still when the news is bad and recent and they haven't yet decided what to do with it. Renee noticed. She was tired. She had been on her feet since midnight, and she had a 45-minute bus ride ahead of her, and Amara had a therapy appointment the next morning she would need to confirm. She had 100 small things pressing at the back of her mind. She noticed anyway. She didn't ask if he was all right. In her experience, men in suits who looked like that didn't want to be asked if they were all right by a woman at a bus stop in work clothes. She reached into her bag and took out the small foil pack of crackers she always carried, a habit from the inventory shifts when she learned that low blood sugar made her irritable and imprecise. And she set it on the bench between them without comment, the way you'd set something down on a table and step back. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. "You don't have to," she said. "They're just crackers." "I haven't eaten since this morning," he said, and his voice was rough, like it had been used a lot recently or not at all. "Then eat the crackers," she said. He did. He ate them slowly, and after a minute some of the tightness went out of his shoulders. Just a fraction. The way a person's body adjusts when one small thing has been taken care of. They did not talk much. The bus came in 11 minutes, and she was on it. She did not look back. She had crackers in her bag because she always carried crackers. She had offered them because someone looked like they needed something, and she had something to give. That was the whole of it. She didn't think about him again. She didn't think about him in the following months when she finally landed the job at the wholesale outfit and threw herself into it so completely that within a year she was supervising a team, and within 2 years the operations manager had told her she was the best hire he'd made in a decade. She knew she was good at the work. She didn't need to be told, though it helped to hear it. She came in early and left late and learned the name of every person on the receiving dock and made it her business to know who was reliable under pressure and who needed extra direction and who had been going through the motions for so long they'd forgotten what showing up fully felt like. She had a team of 8 at the peak of it and ran it with a firm, even hand, and the numbers on her watch were the cleanest in the division. She didn't think about him when that company was sold to a larger regional player, and half the supervisory staff, including Renee, were reorganised out of their positions with 60 days of severance and a form letter. She sat in the parking lot afterward and watched her co-workers come out in ones and twos with their box of desk items, and she thought, not for the first time, that there was something particular about being let go from a job you had been good at. It wasn't only the money, though the money was real. It was the loss of a place where your effort meant something, where what you understood about the work was recognised as worth keeping. The form letter didn't know that. She didn't think about him during the 2 years after that, when she pieced together consulting gigs and contract work, keeping the lights on, keeping Amara's therapy appointments, sitting at the kitchen table at midnight, updating her resume with the careful, steady patience of someone who has learned that quitting is not an option. Amara was 13 by then, tall and quiet and interested in everything, and she watched her mother work with a seriousness that sometimes made Renee's chest ache. She didn't want her daughter to learn that the way the world worked was that you gave your best and got a form letter. She wanted her to learn something else. She wasn't yet sure how to engineer that lesson. She just kept going, and she tried to make the going look like a choice, which most days it was. Have you ever given something small away on a hard day and never found out what it meant to the person who received it? Drop a word in the comments, because what happens next changes everything. Marcus Hale had built his company out of a 14-foot cargo van and a contract to deliver restaurant supplies across 3 counties in western Tennessee. That was in 2001. By 2005, he had 8 drivers and a warehouse space and a roster of clients that included 2 hospital systems. By 2010, he was regional. By 2016, he had 1,100 people on payroll and operations in 4 states, and a cardiologist who had been telling him for 2 years that his stress levels were going to kill him before his competitors got the chance. He hadn't been managing his stress. He knew that. He knew it the way you know a thing you've decided not to act on yet, the way a man tells himself he'll address it after the next quarter, after the next expansion, after the deal closes. He had been sitting at the bus stop because he had just come from his doctor's office, and the news had not been uncertain this time. His heart had shown signs of damage. Not catastrophic, not a cliff edge, but damage. The kind that comes from years of operating under pressure with no release valve. His doctor had been direct in a way doctors sometimes aren't, and Marcus had walked out of that building and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, 45 years old, and the owner of a company, and suddenly aware that none of it insulated him from his own body's accounting. He had sat at the bus stop because he couldn't make himself get back in his car yet. He had sat because he needed to be somewhere that wasn't his office or his empty house, and the bench was there. He didn't know that the woman who sat beside him, who said nothing about his obvious distress, who set crackers down between them and told him to eat them with a quiet matter-of-factness that somehow bypassed all his defences, had been doing inventory counts until 4 a.m. and was on her way home to a daughter who couldn't hear out of her left ear. He didn't know any of that. He only knew that something small had been given to him that evening, freely and without fuss, and that when he stood up to go back to his car, he felt fractionally more like a person and fractionally less like a system failing. He thought about it on and off for a long time after, not obsessively, not sentimentally, but it had lodged in him the way small, true things sometimes do. He had gotten in his car and driven home and made an appointment with a therapist that same week, something his doctor had been recommending for months. He had started sleeping 8 hours instead of 5. He had made changes, the kind that compound slowly, and 4 years later his cardiologist had looked at his numbers and said, with some surprise, that whatever he was doing, he should keep doing it. He had never been able to fully explain, even to himself, what it was about that evening that had cracked something open. A foil packet of crackers and a plain-spoken woman who hadn't made a production of the gesture. But he thought about it when he was grateful. And he was grateful a lot. He had stopped expecting to find her. You don't usually find the people who were kind to you by accident at a bus stop 7 years ago. Life doesn't generally work like that. Then the resume came across his desk. He hadn't recognized the name at first. Colton was common enough. But there was something in the plain, precise language of the resume, the careful specificity of it, the way she described her work without inflation or decoration, that had made him slow down. And then he had seen the employment dates and the Memphis address and the gap years that told the story of someone who had been pushed around by circumstances and kept getting back up, and something had moved in his memory like a drawer being opened. He hadn't trusted it. He wasn't that kind of man, the kind who trusts impressions. He had done the background check and the phone screen, and he had sat 2 floors up and listened to her answer questions in exactly the same unhurried, precise, unsentimental register he remembered from a bus bench in February, and by the time the call was over, he was certain. What he was not certain about was what to do with that certainty. He thought about it for 2 weeks. He could not tell her. He understood that. A man in his position calling a woman in to say that he was hiring her because she gave him crackers at a bus stop 7 years ago was not a conversation that went well. It would embarrass her. It might frighten her. It would turn something clean and accidental into something obligatory. And the thing about what she had done was that it had been clean precisely because there was nothing in it for her. He was not going to soil it by making it a transaction after the fact. So he made her a fair offer for a real job she was genuinely qualified for, and he sent it, and he sat with his hands folded on his desk and thought, she will never know it was her. And that is exactly right. The email landed in Renee's inbox on a Thursday morning in October. She had been at her kitchen table since 6:30, working through a spreadsheet of contract invoices on a laptop with a cracked corner she had been meaning to get repaired for 8 months. Amara was at school. The apartment was quiet in the particular way it got on weekday mornings when Amara was gone, a quiet that was half relief and half ache, the sound of a house that had more room in it than its 2 occupants fully needed. She had applied for the operations coordinator position at Hale Logistics 3 weeks ago and had done the phone interview with a composed and practiced calm she had cultivated over years of needing to be calm when she wasn't, when her hands were cold and her heart was moving faster than she would have liked. She had thought it went well. She had not let herself think about it too much since. She saw the sender line. Hale Logistics, HR Department. She set her coffee down. She opened it and read it twice, slowly, her face very still, the way her face got when something large was landing, and she needed a moment before she let herself feel it. The role was full-time. The salary was $12,000 more per year than her best previous salary. There was a benefits package that included comprehensive medical, dental, and vision, and a continuing education reimbursement clause that would cover the credits she needed to finish the business management degree she had started and set aside and started again over a decade. She sat there for a long time. The apartment was very quiet. Then she folded her arms on the table and put her head down and cried in a way she hadn't cried in years, deep and shaking and without sound. The way a person cries when the relief is so large it doesn't have a smaller form. She called her mother. Her mother prayed with her on the phone. Renee, who did not always know exactly what she believed, but who had been raised by a woman who believed with her whole chest, did not try to modulate or explain away the gratitude. She just let it be. She called Amara's school and left a message for Amara's teacher, not because anything had changed yet, but because she needed to tell someone who would understand what this meant. She said she had gotten a job offer, a real one. The teacher called back during her lunch period and said, "Renee, I am so glad. You have been carrying so much." She had been carrying so much. That was exactly the right way to say it. She accepted the offer that afternoon. She typed the acceptance email with careful, correct language and reread it 3 times before she sent it. She was going to be thorough and exact, and do this job the way she did every job, with everything she had. The company did not know her. She would make it know her. She did not know the company's founder had been thinking about her for 7 years. Her first day was a Monday in early November. She arrived 20 minutes early, which was a habit she did not break in any job regardless of circumstance. The Memphis distribution hub sat in an industrial park off the interstate, a large, clean, well-run facility with a loading dock that operated in 2 shifts and a receiving floor that processed an average of 4,000 units per day. She walked the floor that first morning, quietly, before the 9 o'clock all-hands, and she took note of the things that were right and the things that were not quite right and the things that looked right and probably weren't. She did not say any of this out loud. It was her first day. Her direct supervisor was a man named Dennis who had been running Memphis operations for 6 years and who greeted her with a handshake and a stack of process documentation that was slightly out of date in ways that suggested it had been out of date for longer than 6 months. He was not threatened by her, which she had learned to measure in small ways, whether he answered her questions directly or around them, whether he introduced her to the dock crew or waited for her to ask, whether he included her in the email chain or forwarded things as an afterthought. Dennis was one of the good ones. She knew distribution operations. She had the instincts for it that you either develop or you don't. By the end of the first week, her direct supervisor had told the operations manager that the new hire was going to be valuable, and the operations manager had relayed this to his own director. And Renee had come in on Friday to find a small welcome card on her desk, signed by 6 people whose names she was still learning. She put it in her bag and brought it home, and Amara read every name on it carefully, her hearing aids catching every syllable of Renee's reading it aloud, and said, "Are these your work friends?" "They're going to be," Renee said. Renee. He didn't visit the Memphis hub during Renee's first month. He ran a company with operations in 4 states, and he did not personally manage the day-to-day of any one facility. But he received the reports, and the reports from Memphis showed what he had expected them to show. The new operations coordinator was precise, proactive, and had already flagged 2 recurring inefficiencies in the inbound receiving workflow that the previous coordinator had apparently let ride for 18 months. One of those inefficiencies, once addressed, was projected to save the hub roughly $90,000 annually in labour costs and spoilage. He had hired her for a fair job she was qualified for, and she was exceeding it inside 30 days. He told himself this was not what this was about. The job was real. The hire was real. The fact that she was excellent at it was not a thing he had arranged. He visited Memphis in February, 4 months after her start date. He had scheduled a quarterly review at the hub, and he walked the floor and sat in the meeting and listened to the operations team present their numbers, and Renee was in the room. She presented 2 sections of the quarterly report with the same unhurried clarity that had been in her phone interview, and Marcus sat at the conference table and paid attention to the way she spoke and thought, yes, that is the voice. He had been uncertain in the back of his mind whether memory could sustain that kind of conviction over 7 years, whether he had constructed something larger than the true event. Sitting in that conference room, he was no longer uncertain. After the meeting, he shook hands with each member of the team and said something specific to each person, because he had learned a long time ago that people who work hard want to be seen and not just thanked. When he got to Renee, he said, "The workflow analysis in the second section was strong work. I'd like to see you expand that into a full process audit in Q2. She said, "I was already drafting the framework." He almost smiled. He said, "I thought you might be." She didn't know what to make of that. She went home and told her mother a version of the encounter that left out the part she couldn't explain. The part where the company's founder had said, "I thought you might be," with something in his voice that seemed warmer than a professional evaluation. She filed it away. She had work to do. The process audit she produced over the following 6 weeks was 41 pages and covered 7 interdependent workflow systems across the hub's receiving, processing, and dispatch operations. The recommendations were specific, costed, and sequenced, with a projected 18-month return on implementation investment. Her director sent it to the regional VP. The regional VP sent it to corporate. It landed on Marcus's desk in April with a note attached that read simply, "Memphis. Colton." He read it in one sitting. Then he read the second half again. He called his director of operations and said, "What's the plan for this woman's growth path?" The director said they had been discussing whether the hub could support a senior coordinator role. Marcus said, "That is not a hub question. That is a company question." He told his team to design an expanded role that gave her regional scope and asked them to put together a compensation package that reflected what they were actually asking her to take on. He said he wanted it on his desk in 2 weeks. Then he sat back in his chair and thought about the fact that none of this was about the bus stop. She had earned this. She had earned it at the trucking company she'd been laid off from. She had earned it during the inventory shifts that ran until 4 in the morning. She had earned it at the wholesale company and in the 2 years of contract work after that, and in every careful, patient, unheralded year of doing good work that kept not being recognised. The bus stop was not what made her good at this. It was just the moment she had intersected with his life, a small, true thing she had done because that was who she was, while the rest of her life went on being exactly as hard as it was. He was not doing her a favour. He was doing his company a favour. He wanted to be clear about that, at least in his own mind. He was also grateful. He had been grateful for a long time. Renee was at her desk on a Wednesday afternoon in late May when her director appeared in her doorway and said that Mr. Hale would like to schedule a call with her later that week. She nodded and said, "Of course," and after the director left, she pressed her palms flat on her desk for a moment and breathed. The call was on a Friday. It lasted 35 minutes. Marcus presented the expanded role himself, a regional operations position covering 3 hubs across 2 states, a title she had not held before, a salary she had not earned before, and a clear pathway that the company had not offered her before. She was very quiet for the first few seconds after he finished. She said, "Why me? I've been here 7 months. He said, "Because in 7 months you produced an audit that my most experienced operations people should have produced 3 years ago. And because I think you have been doing work at this level for a long time and not been positioned to show it." A silence. "That's a fair observation," she said carefully. He said, "I try to make fair observations." She accepted the role. She came home that Friday evening and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the wall for a while. Amara came and sat across from her and said, "Mum, what happened?" Renee said, "Something good." Amara was 16 now and understood that her mother did not use that phrase lightly. She reached across the table and took Renee's hand and held it, and Renee looked at her daughter's face, the small hearing aids invisible now beneath the locks she had grown out over the last 2 years, a face so like her own that it sometimes startled her, and she thought, "We are going to be all right. We are going to be more than all right." She had thought that before. This time it felt different. This time it felt like the ground was under it. There is a company ritual at Hale Logistics, something Marcus had started in the early years when the business was small enough that everyone knew everyone. When someone took on a new role the Friday before their first week in it, the Memphis hub did a small gathering at the end of the afternoon shift. Nothing elaborate. A cake from the grocery store bakery. A round of applause from whoever was there. The person's director said a few words. Renee's gathering was the last Friday of May. Her director said she was one of the most precise thinkers who had ever worked in his facility, and he was going to be genuinely annoyed at losing her to the regional team. People laughed. Someone had put her name on the cake in blue frosting. Marcus was there. He had flown in for a different meeting, and he stayed. He stood at the edge of the room and watched and did not say anything during the formal part. He watched Dennis make the speech, and he watched the dock crew come in from the end of the afternoon shift, still in their vests, and stand along the wall eating cake. And he watched Renee stand in the centre of it all and accept the kind words with the same composure she brought to everything, genuine and unperformative. A smile that reached her eyes, but did not overreach them. He had stood at this edge for several months deciding. He had weighed the possibility that telling her would change something important, the professional relationship, the easy clarity she had in her role, her own understanding of why she had been hired. He didn't want her to spend 1 minute wondering whether she had earned the position or whether it had been given to her out of something that looked like pity from the outside, even when it wasn't. He had been careful about that. He had concluded eventually that she was not that kind of woman. She had too much of the right kind of confidence to doubt something she could look at and assess directly. She knew what her work was worth. She had known for a long time, even when the market hadn't agreed. After, when people were eating cake and the room had loosened into conversation, he walked over to where Renee was standing. He had thought about this moment. He had decided, and then undecided, and then decided again. He had decided that she deserved to know. Not because it changed anything about the job, which was real and earned and not contingent on her knowing. Not because he needed her to be grateful, because she already was in the dignified, unsentimental way that was natural to her. But because the thing she had done had mattered, and she had gone 7 years not knowing that it mattered, and something in him believed that people who do good in the dark deserve to know at least once that someone saw it. He said, "I want to tell you something. You don't have to do anything with it." She looked at him. Careful, as always, he said, "About 7 years ago I was having a bad day, a significant one. I was sitting on a bench at a bus stop near downtown, and a woman sat down beside me and set a packet of crackers between us and said, 'Eat them,' like it was just a thing you said, because it was the practical thing and the obvious thing, and she had something to give, and someone needed it." Renee went very still. She was on her way home from a night shift, he said. She didn't make a thing of it. She got on the bus, and I never saw her again. He paused. I went home that evening and made changes I'd been putting off for a long time. Medical changes, mostly. Things my doctor had been telling me to do. I don't know exactly why that evening was the one that moved me, but it was. And I have thought about that woman a lot over the years. Renee's hand, holding a paper plate with a piece of cake on it, was very still. Her face was the face she made when something large was landing and she was deciding whether to let it. "When your resume came across my desk," Marcus said, "I recognized you. I want to be clear that I did not hire you because of a packet of crackers. I hired you because your resume was strong and your interview was strong, and everything you have done in this building for 7 months has confirmed it. The job was real before I knew who you were, and it will be real after this conversation." He stopped. He said, "I just thought you should know that it mattered. The small thing. It mattered." Renee set her plate down on the table beside her. She pressed her lips together. Her eyes were bright. She said, "I had forgotten about it." "I know," he said. "That's why I wanted to tell you." She was quiet for a moment. Around them, the room continued its celebration, oblivious. She said, "I was on my way home from a night shift inventory job. I was so tired I could barely track time. I had crackers in my bag because if I didn't eat regularly on those shifts, I got mean." The smallest, thinnest sound of a laugh. "I didn't do anything remarkable." "No," he said. "You just did the next obvious thing. Yeah, that's usually what changes things." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "Thank you for telling me," he said. "Thank you for the crackers." She laughed, a real one this time, and pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and he thought, there it is. That is exactly what I remember. She went home that evening with a piece of cake wrapped in a napkin for Amara. She sat at the kitchen table and told her daughter the whole story, slowly, all the way back to the night shift and the bus stop, and the man in the good suit with his head bowed and the crackers in her bag. And Amara listened with the particular intense attention she gave to stories that she understood were important. When Renee finished, Amara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You gave him crackers because he looked like he needed them." "Yes." "And then he gave you a job." "He gave me a job I earned," Renee said. "That part is important." Amara thought about this with the gravity of a 16-year-old who takes things seriously. She said, "What would have happened if you hadn't had crackers that day?" Renee looked at her daughter. She thought about the inventory shifts and the $40 deposits into the college fund and the $3,400 hearing aids and the resume she had updated at midnight for more years than she could easily count. All the small, unglamorous acts of maintenance that had gotten them here. "We would have been fine," she said. "We were going to be fine either way." She believed that. She had always believed it, even when it was hardest to. She had kept going, not because she was certain of reward, but because quitting was not in her. The crackers were not a strategy. The resume was not a strategy. She was just who she was all the way through, and she had kept being it, even when being it cost her. That was the part she wanted Amara to hold. The regional role launched in June. Renee covered 3 hubs and spent her Tuesdays in Memphis and her Wednesdays in Jackson, and learned the specific weight of each facility's problems the way she had always learned things. By listening before speaking, and by counting before calculating, and by trusting that a flaw that looked right and felt wrong was usually telling the truth. Within her first quarter, she had identified a carrier contract inefficiency across all 3 hubs that the regional team had been absorbing as a fixed cost for 4 years. She had noticed it in the invoicing data on her 3rd week in the regional role, a small discrepancy in fuel surcharge calculations that compounded across thousands of loads into something that was not small at all. She had flagged it to her director, who passed it up the chain, and the renegotiated carrier terms that followed saved the company $230,000 in the first 8 months alone. It earned her a meeting with the Director of National Operations, a man named Caldwell, who wore the careful reserve of someone who had been in the industry long enough to have seen a lot of things overpromised and underdelivered. He said, with the measured appreciation of a man who chose his words, that she had an eye for the thing that wasn't right. She said, "I've been looking at broken systems for a long time." He said, "Well, you're not looking at them from the outside anymore." She took the compliment without false modesty and without inflation. She filed the meeting in her mind and went back to work because there were 2 more inefficiencies she had identified and hadn't yet brought forward, and she wanted the data tighter before she did. Amara started her junior year in September with a college counselor her school had assigned and a list of programs she was interested in, and Renee had sat down with her and the list and the numbers and said, "Tell me what you want. Not what you can afford. Tell me what you want, and we will figure out how to get there." She had never been able to say it quite that way before. She did not feel rich. She felt stable, which was better because stable was what her daughter needed, and stable was what she had spent 11 years building toward through every stripped-down economy and every extra shift and every careful choice about what to spend and what to hold back. Stable was not luck. Stable was the accounting of years, and the accounting had finally balanced. On a Thursday in October, 1 year after her hire date, she found herself driving to the distribution hub in the early morning, the city still half dark, the October cold coming in at the edges of the windows. The radio was off. She was running through the day's agenda in her mind, the carrier meeting at 8, the floor walk at 9:30, the call with the Jackson hub director at 11. She thought about the bus stop, not with sentimentality. She thought about it the way you think about a hinge, about a moment that turned something. She had been on her way home from a night shift, and she had been so tired she could barely count, and she had set crackers on a bench because a stranger looked like he needed them. She had not thought about it in years. She had not been building toward anything. She was just who she was. The city lightened ahead of her. The first buildings were picking up the glow at their edges, the eastern sky going from grey to a pale, tentative gold, the kind of morning that was quiet enough to notice. She pulled into the facility lot and sat for a moment before she got out. Her phone screen showed a text from Amara, sent at 6:47. "Good luck today, Mom. Not that you need it." She sat with it for a moment, that small thing. Then she got out of the car and walked across the parking lot and into the building where she was known and where her work was worth something, and the day began. Kindness doesn't always come back, but when it does, it doesn't come back as luck. It comes back as a door opened by someone who was paying attention. All she had done was be herself, fully and without calculation, in the dark and in the light, in the nights that cost her, and the mornings that asked her to keep going. And in the end, she didn't have to be anything else. If you have a story about kindness you gave away without knowing what it would mean, share it below. And if this story stayed with you, there is another one waiting that I think you will feel just as deeply. This story is a work of fiction created for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real individuals, events, or organizations is coincidental.